All righty.
I had to make sure that we are socially distant.
You know, I appreciate that. How you been, man?
I'm good. I'm Speedy.
I
Nice
know
to
who
meet
you are, Speedy.
Okay, that's an
Yeah,
honor.
you know, I actually, I've seen you out there.
I love to hear that. That's
You've
great
been doing
news
some
to
good
me.
work.
I try my best. I wish we didn't have to sit this far, but
I know,
obviously
man. You know, I'd be giving you the dap and the.
it's all good. We'll do it telepathically. You know what I'm saying? Metaphorically.
That's exactly right.
I got to comment. The fit is
You
great.
know what?
Great outfit, my brother.
But you're clean, man.
I try
You
my
know,
best. I threw on the Air Force Ones to be even more metaphoric. You know what I'm saying?
I have a very fine sneaker collection, but I thought if I wore sneakers, it looked like I was trying too hard.
Fair.
You know what I mean?
Fair.
You don't.
Fair. You don't want to look like you're pandering or anything.
You don't want to look like the old guy in the club. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the guy who's been there too long, and I know exactly what you mean, President. I know exactly what you mean. For Complex News, it's 360 with Speedy Mormon. I'm him, and today we have a very special guest, maybe the most special guest that we could possibly have. It's the 44th President of the United States, Mr. Barack Obama. How are you, man?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so very honored. And I think back to years ago, maybe the first time you were ever on 60 Minutes.
Right.
Malia was asked, what does your dad make other than tuna fish? And she said, only chili, and that's it. And here we are in Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C. It makes sense. I'm wondering, have you learned to make anything else, or is that it for you?
You know what? I've got a few other things under my sleeve, but basically my repertoire is pretty small. And I think it's fair to say that since that time, I have done even less cooking. During the presidency, one thing you had was some chefs who could really throw down and fix some good food. So fortunately, Ben's Chili Bowl has been an iconic spot here in D.C. And I've had some half smokes here, and it is worth visiting for those who don't know about it.
Now, the memoir, obviously, A Promised Land, came out this week, and I think that it did a really good job, and you did a really good job of kind of humanizing yourself in a way that maybe a lot of people haven't seen before, including myself. I was kind of shocked that, you, the President of the United States, is a human being too. You know what I'm saying? You are very open in the book about your racial identity, starting very early on. I'm biracial as well, right. Same dynamic, white mom, black dad. And you say that you too have experienced your fair share of racial slights, right. From a young age. I'm wondering, maybe is there one that stuck out that kind of you remember?
You know, I mentioned in the book, and I've spoken about this before, I grew up in Hawaii, and in some ways it's hard to have a childhood that is less stressful. It's 80 degrees, you got beaches, there's a lot of different kinds of people, of different backgrounds, hues, and so in some ways I was protected and insulated from it. But even in Hawaii, you'd start, as you became a teenager, walking by a car and suddenly you'd hear the locks go down, or you get in an elevator and the purse would be clutched. Clutched. Before I started playing basketball, I played tennis for a while, and I remember looking at the brackets that had been set up for a tournament and putting my finger on it, and the tennis coach at the time says, "Be careful, you might rub off on the paper." Right? And this is somebody who's instructing young people at the school that I was at. So, those kinds of things I think we all have had to deal with. But I'm careful to make the point that relative to kids who are growing up in Philly or Chicago or the Bronx, the kinds of pressures they have to experience at an earlier age are entirely different. And part of my inspiration to get into politics was the inspiration of the civil rights movement, and knowing that I want to live in a country where kids aren't feeling that feeling.
And don't have to experience.
Don't have to experience that. All of us as humans are going to have to go through hardships. Some of us are going to be luckier than others. But there shouldn't be a systemic situation where some kids from an early age are suddenly feeling like somehow they might be outside looking in.
As the story goes, you end up in New York studying at Columbia University before you go to Chicago.
Right.
And there's a quick line that for many would just skate by, but you said that you bounced around in a couple of ill-fitting jobs in New York. Yeah. I'm wondering what those jobs were. Is the former president delivering pizzas on the weekend, or what were these jobs?
Listen, I had all kinds of jobs in New York, and I had all kinds of living arrangements in New York.
Yeah.
Because this is the early '80s, and New York had just come out of bankruptcy, and it was just starting to become what we now know of as New York. So Times Square is still rough. Mm-hmm. And there are big chunks of the city that are still torn up. But you're starting to see rents going up, and I was broke. I'm a student, and so I'm living in sublets that, you find out that the person subletting it to you doesn't actually have the lease. You have to go down to housing court, and you've lost your deposit. There was one place where I was staying where the guy was actually doing construction in the room right next to where I was, so rubble's kind of spilling into your living space. And I did construction work. I remember the New York firefighters, they had to do something with their medical records, and there was a big refiling job, and I was doing that. And then I worked for a magazine for a while that was a business magazine, and then I left because I knew that what I wanted to do was really change the world and be part of a broader movement for social change. But even then, I was kind of bouncing around trying different things until this group of churches in Chicago called me up and said, look, we're setting up a community organization. Do you want to drive out here? And I drove out there sight unseen, and that's really where I started growing up, learning how I might be able to have an impact.
Yeah, they scooped you up for a calm 13K.
13K, man.
If I'm not mistaken.
And car expenses.
You can't forget about the car expenses. You say a line in the book, now that we're speaking about jobs, you say, I believe you say, for all its power and pomp, the presidency is still just a job. And that's a lens that maybe a lot of people have never thought about it through. Right. You maybe had the world's shortest commute ever. The West Colonnade was, I think you said it was a 1-minute walk.
That's exactly
outside.
Right.
Why do you put it through that lens of it just being a job? And maybe what's that work-life balance like?
Well, part of the goal of the book, because you did a good job mentioning sort of the passage I go through, right? I talk about my youth, the fact that I was not somebody who was born into a family that was political. We certainly weren't wealthy. I wasn't somebody who was saying that I was going to be president and being student council and all that stuff. And the reason is because I want young people who pick up the book to feel as if they're on a journey with somebody who's just like them. I was not so special or so exceptional. I had some good breaks. I had some opportunities. I had some mentors and people who looked after me. But probably the most important thing that I did was just say to myself, you know what, if I'm going to do something with my life, let it be something that has a broader impact on other people. Mm. And that landed me in the White House. And so I want people to be able to relate to that, because I think so many young people look at the presidency or politics or government as something so far removed, so distant that they can't relate. But the bottom line is, this is a group of people who are trying to make decisions about how we together are sharing resources and solving problems. And it's not that different from a lot of other organizations. The stakes are higher, but it is something that is understandable if you choose to pay attention to it. And that is part of the job of citizenship, is us recognizing this is a government of, by, and for the people. It's not them ruling over us. Sure. It's how do we come together to rule ourselves.
Yeah, there was a time, especially early on in your political career, where it seemed like absolutely nothing was going your way. Right. You got blown out by Rush. Then your American Express card gets declined. You're trying to rent a car. You go to the DNC, you don't even have the right credential, can't get on the floor of the convention.
Exactly.
You say in the book that you can't get into a party that night, then you wind up crashing on a couch. It seems like absolutely nothing was going your way.
That was not a good moment.
Not a good moment, but you still became president.
Yeah.
You didn't let it deter you. It seems as though you bet on yourself almost.
Well,
and I'm wondering why. Why is it so important to bet on yourself?
Yeah, I tell that story because here I am, I've lost an election for Congress. And I'm going to the Democratic National Convention and nobody's paying attention to me. I can't even really get on the floor. I'm feeling discouraged. I'm broke. Michelle is mad at me because, I've been spending a lot of time on politics, and that has put some strain on our family budget. We've already got at that point one young child and one on the way. And yet, 4 years later, I was the keynote speaker at
that same convention. Yeah.
Except this one was in Boston. And 6 years later, I'm running for president. And it gives you some sense of the fact that if there's anything that I've learned, not just in politics, but in life, is persistence in pursuit of a goal if you believe in that goal, if you care about it. Now, a lot of luck is still involved, and I, one of the things that I write about in A Promised Land is sometimes I would meet people who've been successful, Wall Street, CEOs and bankers, who somehow think, I'm successful, and it's because I'm smarter than everybody else. And I write about the fact that, anybody who doesn't attribute some of what's happened to them to good fortune, who
Chance,
thinks it's all
luck.
them.
Right.
To me, that means you don't really have much insight into how the world works.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who work hard. There are a lot of people who make a bet on themselves, who are talented, but things just don't work out. And that's part of the reason why my politics has always been about making sure everybody has a chance, and when people fall, society is there to give them a little bit of a hand up, because none of us are immune from bad fortune, just like good fortune, and we don't know ahead of time who that's going to be.
Yeah. I don't know if you're able to tell this by looking at me, but I haven't lived through many presidents.
I can. Are you rubbing in the fact that you are young and I'm not?
No, not quite.
Come
not
on.
quite. But I have, realistically, I haven't lived through many presidents.
Right.
But many people consider you to be the cool president. A colleague and I were speaking, and he described President George W. Bush as the president that you want to have a beer with. I'm wondering, for someone maybe even younger than myself who didn't get a chance to live through your presidency, in a line or so, how would you frame your presidency? What type of president were you? Who were you?
I would say I'm the president who tried to bring everybody to the table and to include everybody in the benefits and the bounty of America. Look, as my press secretary, Robert Gibbs, said while we were running for president, people noticed that none of my predecessors looked like me.
Yeah.
Right? So there was an obvious symbolism to being the first African American president. But beyond that, I was just as concerned with what's happening to poor rural white folks, or Latinos who are in bad schools and not getting the kinds of health care that they need, or LGBTQ kids who were being bullied and left out. I'd like to think that my presidency was about saying everybody matters, not just some of us.
Yeah.
And then trying to operationalize that.
If you were born, not when you were, but say the year 2000, a Gen Z young Barack Obama,
Right.
what does that look like? Who is that Barack Obama, you think?
Who knows? I will say that when I look at my daughters, this generation, the generation that makes up a lot of your viewership and leadership, is more sophisticated, been exposed to more, better educated as a general rule. I think more open to people's differences. You think about just something like the image of black folks that was available to me when I was growing up, where you had Sidney Poitier and you had Diane Carroll on TV, maybe just a handful of folks. Now, through both television and the internet, you have black lawyers, black doctors, you had a black president and a black first lady, you had folks of every walk of life doing everything. Business leaders, entrepreneurs. Music is dominated by hip hop. So your generation, I think, and I guess if I was growing up now, I would feel that there are so many more options available to me in terms of how I want to be, who I want to emulate, what fields I want to go into, and that's a powerful thing. But I also would like to think that I would still recognize we've got a lot more work to do. And this summer, after the George Floyd killing, to see this generation take up the baton of John Lewis and Diane Nash and Bob Moses and some of the heroes of the civil rights movement and say, no, we're going to keep pressing for more justice and more equity, more fairness. That was inspiring to me. I'd like to think I would have been one of those young people who said, we got more work to do.
Do you think that you would have at all resembled your daughters?
They're smarter than I am and cooler. They've always been cooler. I had to develop it. They got that from their mama. When I look at Malia and Sasha and the degree of confidence combined with kindness and their instinct of treating everybody with respect and helping people, I'm really proud of them. And the fact that they were able to do that, going through this very strange experience of growing up in the White House, is a testament to Michelle and my mother-in-law and all the people who helped raise them, but also just an internal grace that they've had that I'm really proud of.
On a more serious note, and on maybe all fronts, it feels like this is the biggest divide that I've lived through, whether it's racial, whether it's financial, in almost every way that I can think of. And there's a quote from your book that sticks out, or you may have said it in an interview actually. You say, "I come out of this book very worried about the degree to which we do not have a common baseline of fact." And I want to share with you my experience of watching the presidential debates. This is I've covered elections, the last election, but when I was watching the presidential debates, I tried to come into it with an open mind. And so what I would do is I would flip back and forth between Fox News and CNN.
Right.
And after watching, when presented with the identical content, right, we all watch the same debate. If I put on Fox News, the lower third would say, Biden stumbles through debate. And then I put on CNN and it says, Trump stumbles through debate. It seems as though we have a real issue here if there is so much up for debate when we are presented with the same thing. Can you help diagnose this problem and maybe give us a solution? What is going on?
Listen, I think you just described the problem. And it has to do with the fact that the media is now splintered into 1,000 pieces. When I was very young, you had 3 TV stations, 3 broadcast networks, and you had maybe a handful of papers that were national, and all of the journalists kind of followed the same playbook and reported on the same thing in the same way. And so whether you were conservative, liberal, black, white, you basically got the same information, and then you'd have arguments, but you were kind of occupying the same headspace. And what has happened now, you've got not just 1,000 channels, on your cable or direct TV. Not only do you have all kinds of different news outlets, but you have the internet and social media. So what happens then is people start choosing what information they want that reinforces their biases, that tells them what they want to hear, not necessarily what they need to hear. And that has gotten worse over time. Now, obviously I'm a Democrat and I'm a progressive, so I think that generally speaking, if you look at mainstream news outlets or outlets on the left, they fact check and stick to journalistic standards more than a lot of these right-wing news sites do. And you witness right now with the election over and all objective folks, even Republicans who aren't in elected office, acknowledge Joe Biden won, and yet if you were watching some of those conservative stations, they're acting like there's all kinds of fraud and illegality going on, when in fact there's no evidence of that. So at the end of the day, facts do matter. There is a pandemic going on right now. You can dismiss it and say it's not serious and that you're not going to wear a mask and that you're going to go ahead and go to a bar and party. Somebody will get sick. Reality will bite if you're not paying attention to it. And so we're going to have to find ways in which, particularly social media outlets now, are more careful about distributing misinformation. And that's a hard thing to do without engaging in the kind of censorship that is not part of our tradition.
Sure, you say we're going to have to find ways, but what are some of those ways? I mean, you've got people who are literally denying the fact that we are in a pandemic that has killed 250,000 people. You've got people that are believing in QAnon stuff and just being reinforced by the people eat what they're fed, and so they're being reinforced. How do we even level with one another?
Let's take a simple example. It used to be that the broadcast networks had to provide equal time to two sides of a debate. It used to be that there were rules governing what could or could not appear on the air based on public interest. It used to be that journalists had standards of fact-checking before they report on something. Social media, it is possible, because they're private organizations, to be held accountable if they're disseminating what is patently false. So there are ways of doing this. What combination of new standards and government regulation creates at least some constraints on crazy stuff that is appearing and inflammatory stuff. That is a debate that we have to have, and I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet to it. But if we don't have it, then you're going to see the country break further and further apart, and that is going to put a strain on our democracy that is even worse than what we've seen now.
If the country divides even more, what do you think that looks like?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, I am always optimistic about this country's ability to recover. For all the arguments that we're having right now, it's nothing compared to what we've had in the past with, like, an actual civil war.
Sure. But people think we could get there.
Yeah, look, I think that the country's more complicated. It's more intermingled. You go to a red state, but if you go into the city in the red state, you've got a whole bunch of folks who've got really liberal views. You go into a so-called blue state, there are a whole bunch of places that are really conservative. I think that Trump got votes from black folks and Hispanic folks even more than he did the first time, despite what I would consider to be inflammatory, racially charged politics that he practices, which just goes to show that we're more complicated than sometimes the media portrays the country. And listen, I was elected twice, not just once. So the first time might have been an accident. The second time I was elected, and there were a whole bunch of white voters, rural voters, people who were assumed to be conservative, who voted for me. This is not unique to the right. The left, you see doing it too. Just believing stuff because it's on your phone. And one thing that I want all of us, particularly young people, to do, and I talk to Malia and Sasha about this sometimes, is do a little fact checking on your sources, right? Just because somebody posts something on Instagram doesn't make it true.
Right.
And I think we have a habit now of, just because the format's nice and it looks like, oh, that looks official, that we automatically accept it. And I think we've got to develop our own filters of recognizing, if I read something that sounds crazy, well, let me see if I can check with some other sources before I forward that information.
Before we leave this conversation, simple yes or no, do you think, and I'm only asking because a lot of people fear this, that we could potentially enter some sort of race war?
No, because there are too many folks like you and me whose families are made up of all kinds of different people. This country is too diverse for that to happen again. But I think we can find ourselves where our democracy doesn't work because we start being so angry and misinformed about each other and are so ready to assume the worst about each other that we can't sit down and just compromise and work stuff out.
Good. That's good news, and I hope that rings true. We have just crossed a devastating figure, like I mentioned earlier, 250,000 deaths due to COVID-19. Many people are hesitant because they don't know who to trust, they don't know what to trust. Right. And so when and if a vaccine was to come out, many people have already said that they will not take it. Mm-hmm. Will you take a COVID-19 vaccine?
I will take it once FDA approves it. If Dr. Fauci says it's all right, if the Biden administration, and who I know will have surrounded him with the best scientists and experts, if they say this is not only effective but also safe, then not only will I take it, but my whole family will take it, because that's how we make advances in modern science. And I understand why there's mistrust, because we've had a president of the United States who's sown mistrust and given people bad information and talked about, well, maybe we'll try shooting bleach into ourselves or other strange ideas. And so at a certain point, people say, well, I don't know who to trust. But overall, the scientists, the epidemiologists, the experts on this issue have been very consistent as they've learned more about this disease. And you have to put, I dealt with a pandemic when I first came into office, H1N1. Then I dealt with Ebola, which never got to our shores, in part because we engineered an intervention in those African countries where it was breaking out. And in both cases, that's not a problem anymore. The reason is science. It wasn't because we closed our eyes and wished it away or rejected science. It's because we embraced what the human mind can conceive in terms of curing diseases.
Mr. President, this year was my first time voting. It was my pop's first time voting as well. It was, I'd like to imagine, millions of other people's first time voting as well. And the argument to people who don't vote is very often, my vote doesn't matter. But here we are, having already cast our ballot. And there are many people out there who are now feeling like, look, I voted, and my vote still doesn't matter because the president will not leave the White House.
Well, he's going to leave the White House. He may not like leaving. He may not be a gracious loser, but he lost. And he will leave, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will end up being President and Vice President of the United States, and that will make a difference. One of the things that I try to describe in the book is the fact that bringing about social change is hard, because this is a big, messy country. And there are a bunch of folks who are trying to block anything that you're trying to do. But as messy as it was, we got the Affordable Care Act passed, Obamacare. 20 million people had health insurance that didn't have it before. Because we passed a law that changed the student loan system, billions of dollars that were going to banks to process that loan system, we took it away from the banks, and it meant that young people got more Pell Grants and better rates on their loans. It didn't change everything. It doesn't transform the country overnight, but it makes it a little bit better. And that's where voting matters. It's not that it's going to solve all our problems right away, but it puts in place people who hear your voice, know what you're going through, and are going to fight to make sure that your issues are addressed. It may be half a loaf and not a whole loaf, but it's going to be better than it was. And that's why the folks who keep on voting, they tend to get more stuff, and they get a more responsive government. A
lot of young people are maybe as politically activated as ever.
Right.
I think to, hundreds of thousands of young teens on TikTok mobilizing to theoretically reserve tickets at the president's rallies and take over hashtags and things like that. And many of them want to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez become the president one day. Do you think that that could happen?
It could. Look, I mean, she is a talented politician and public servant. She is charismatic. She, I think, is articulating a vision about what a lot of young people are looking for, a more responsive, equitable economic system. And so, I like seeing the young talent that is starting to come up within the Democratic Party. You need new voices pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Now, you also need to recognize that change and the political process is hard, and that at some point you hit up against limits, and then you have to figure out, all right, where do I compromise to get what I can now? You get what you can, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with then aspiring to something more than we got. So I always want the Democratic Party to have in it a sense of boldness and the future. But what I want to avoid is a circular firing squad where we're so obsessed with differences in tactics and strategy and emphasis that we forget that there are folks who don't want people to have any kind of health care at all.
Sure.
And that's the bigger fight that we have to keep our eye on.
Would you endorse Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
Oh, it's way too early. For what? Who knows? I endorsed her already for her congressional seat. So the other thing is, give everybody time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You've spoken out, not only in the book, but in real life, about the killing of unarmed black men at the hands of police. We've seen it time and time again during your presidency, before your presidency, well after your presidency. I'm wondering if you would defund the police.
No, because I think the phrase implies that somehow we could do without the police, or that the police are the only source of our problem. But what I would do is rethink how we do policing in a lot of communities.
Have we not tried that with reform? Everybody always says reform.
The truth is we've never tried robust reform. There are places where we have tried it, and it actually makes a difference.
I remember somewhere in mind?
Well, I'll just give you a small example. I remember when I was president, I visited the city of Camden, where a young police chief had come in, and he had said, you know what, when we're dealing with drug dealing in public spaces, parks, etc., during the summer, and there's been conflict and shootings and violence, we're going to have a whole new tactic. And he actually sent, instead of SWAT teams and cars, he actually sent an ice cream truck. And suddenly you have a bunch of kids and families eating ice cream and enjoying the park. And lo and behold, the folks who were dealing drugs are uncomfortable doing it in front of all these families, which then builds trust between the communities and the police, which then allowed them to be more effective in targeting those who were victimizing the communities. And you saw a reduction of police citizen violence and improvement in terms of performance. So the point is, there are steps that can be taken. We've seen it tried in local communities. What we haven't done is systematize it. And what we need to do is now call attention to what works, not just focus on what doesn't work, but focus on what works, and let's see if we can duplicate it other places.
Michelle Obama, your wife, obviously posted a photo on Instagram this week, and it was a photo of the two of you, and she said in there, Donald Trump had spread racist lies about my husband that put my family in danger. Do you think Donald Trump is racist?
You know, I don't know what's in his heart, but I do know that he is okay with racist rhetoric. I do know that racial groups or racist groups have embraced him, and when asked to condemn them, he's been unwilling to. And you know, Dr. King, when asked about anti-lynching legislation and other civil rights legislation, people saying, well, that's not going to change somebody's heart, you know, and change their minds. He said, you know, that's all right as long as the law stops them from lynching me. I'm okay with that. And that's my attitude. I'm less interested in, you know, figuring out what the psychology of a Donald Trump is than I am in making sure that our elected leaders are on the side of not discriminating against people, not being biased, not directing hate crimes against folks. And if you can't simply and clearly say there's a right and a wrong when it comes to these issues, I've got a problem with that.
Shifting gears a bit, I want to ask you about a quote that you said that admittedly bothered myself and many other people. It was in an interview with The Atlantic.
Right.
You were speaking on rappers tending to support Donald Trump.
Some.
Yes. And you said, I have to remind myself that if you listen to rap music, it's all about the bling, the women, the money. A lot of rap videos are using the same measures of what it means to be successful as Donald Trump. So I think the line that bothered a lot of people is the word all.
Yeah, and that's probably, look, you're speaking to a president who brought Common, Kendrick Lamar,
and that's what I was going to say.
J. Cole into the White House, whose
Wale.
every playlist has hip hop. So I am the first to recognize the power of hip hop, not just as music, but as social commentary. I am a huge fan of all kinds of rappers, and many of them are my friends. So what is true though, and I think, you know, every time I make a statement like this, I get pushback, and I'm like, come on, y'all, what, you're not listening to these lyrics? You're not watching these videos? There are many, even among rappers I love, attitudes with respect to women or material belongings that reinforce the sense that the measure of the man is how much stuff he's got and sexual conquest. And that is not a controversial statement. That is a
I don't
true
disagree.
statement.
I don't disagree, but it's the all.
And that's fair. Look, you do enough interviews, there's going to be a slip somewhere in terms of broad characterizations. I think people need to, look at across the board what I've said with respect to not just my admiration for any particular artist, but my embrace of hip hop culture that I brought into the White House in a way that was unprecedented. I think there's enormous power there. But I also think it's important for us as men to realize that stuff we enjoy and take for granted sometimes has messages that I don't know how young boys coming up are internalizing. I think we have to recognize that as Americans, we are in a culture that puts a big premium on material wealth, no matter how you got it, and no matter what impact it has on other people, and that is pervasive in our culture. And Donald Trump is almost a caricature of this, right? Everything's gold-plated. Everything, is big, and I'm going to show off all my wealth. And we're not immune from that. Our whole culture is full of that. And I think that what's been always interesting to me is artists who ask questions about that. Now, sometimes they're reflecting the reality of the world that they live in.
Their upbringing, their community.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean we stop asking questions about it, because that's how we're going to grow, and we have to reflect. It's similar. I remember I was on stage with Steph Curry a while back, and a young man, because we were. This was about our program, My Brother's Keeper, which focuses on how can we ensure that young men of color aren't just on a pipeline to prison or being attacked or being sidelined in the economy. And it's been, very successful across the country. We've done a lot of cool things. And one of the young men who was on stage asked, what can we do about this issue of toxic masculinity? And I said the same thing. I said, look, we have to internalize the fact that there's a part of us that has incorporated a value system in this country about what's important, that sometimes puts women on a second tier and values material possessions over, spiritual and social goals. And afterwards, people are like, "Oh man, why are you going after?" Look, I know, because I am. I am somebody who grew up in this culture as well. It's funny. I was telling somebody during the pandemic, I've been looking back at old movies, and some of the movies I grew up with. You watch like James Bond. Sean Connery just died, and I'm watching some old James Bond. I used to love those old James Bond movies, but sometimes I watch that and I watch how he's treating women in those movies, and I go like, oh man, I didn't even notice that when I was a kid. I just thought Sean Connery's cool. James Bond is cool. That's how a man's supposed to be. And it's only now, partly by educating myself and hearing Michelle talk about what she's gone through and the Me Too movement, et cetera, where you start saying to yourself, oh, if somebody treated my daughters the way I'm seeing that depicted, if I were a woman, how would that make me feel? And so that is something that I think we have to have a conversation about. This is not the main problem we have, right? This is not something that is on par with systemic racism and discrimination and joblessness and police misconduct, but it is still part of our self-reflection that we have to engage in if we're going to be successful in building up our communities in a circumstance where oftentimes we've got a larger society that remains hostile in certain situations. It's a both-and proposition, not an either-or proposition, which is something that everybody from Malcolm X to Dr. King understood.
One day there will be the Obama biopic. Have you ever thought about who you might want to play you in that biopic?
No, man. There have already been a couple movies that I haven't watched the whole things, but I've seen clips.
Like bits and pieces.
Yeah, and you know, some of them do, you know, a pretty good job. Obviously, I have a distinctive way of talking that folks like to exaggerate, and it's always fun.
Are they exaggerating? I don't know.
You know, they might not be, but let's just say they know how to really emphasize it.
Put a little extra on there.
A little extra on there. You know, it's interesting. I write about this in the book, that part of the strangeness of being any kind of public figure, certainly being the president, is that there is the image of you, the projection of you, and then there's you. And those things aren't perfectly matched. For me, what I discovered was that it's best for me not to worry too much about how I'm being portrayed in that fictional life, because I've got a real life with real responsibilities and a real family that I've got to take care of.
Nearly 10 years ago, Drake had told someone, I'm waiting for somebody to make the Obama biopic. I'm biracial. I know I could kill the role. I don't even turn off the TV when he's on. Would you give the thumbs up and the okay for Drake to play you in a biopic?
I will say this. Drake seems to be able to do anything he wants. I mean, that is a talented brother. And so, you know, if the time comes and he's ready, you know.
Does he have your stamp of approval?
You know what? Drake has, more importantly, I think, my household's stamp of approval. I suspect Malia and Sasha would be just fine with it.
Age-old debate. You've been asked a million times. Michael Jordan, LeBron James. You've not wavered. You've always said Michael Jordan, but you've not been asked since LeBron James won his 4th championship.
LeBron is making strides in the GOAT debate.
But he's not there yet.
Not quite, because look, his career's not over yet, and we don't know how many more rings he might win. Here's what I will say about LeBron, who is indisputably one of the top 2 already.
Fair.
His longevity.
Unbelievable.
The fact that I joked about him because I was with him on the shop right before the election, and you know, he doesn't look like he's lost
a step.
Yeah. You know, I know that he is benefiting from the kind of training and nutrition and treatments and all that you know, folks in Michael's generation just did not benefit from. But part of it is just he's a freak, and right now it looks like he could keep on doing what he's doing right now for another 5 years, right?
Yeah.
If at 40, you know, he's still an all-star and competing in this way, you know, that you have to factor that in. But man, let me just say this. I'm going to put a little rank on you. You're young. Michael at his peak was a sight to behold. And he was doing it in an era where folks were beating the heck out of him.
I hear you.
So
what tangible thing will LeBron have to do to be the greatest? Is it 6 rings? Is it 2 more rings and then you'll say he got it?
You know what? I'm not the final arbiter on all this. I acknowledge the bias of being from Chicago. I think when you start getting into sports debates, it's a little bit like music debates. The music that you grew up with is always going to feel closer to your heart than the music that comes up 30 years later, right? The sports stars and heroes when you were coming up are always going to be, you know, close to you. And I think each generation just has to embrace, you know, who they love and you know, for your generation, there is no doubt that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of this time, and we'll let the broader debate settle itself out.
Seems like he's not going to get it from you, Mr. President. It seems
what?
like it's not coming.
Is Kendrick Lamar better than Marvin Gaye? I love both, right? They're just different.
A little different. We're talking same sport. Now we're talking different genres, but fair enough. Fair enough. I sat down with Allen Iverson a bit over a year ago, and he told me that he goes back and looks at his old stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you ever go back and look at some of your highlights?
No.
Never.
No. I think it is healthy not to focus too much on what attention you've got and focus on the work. That was part of how I kept saying during the White House. One of the things I'm proud about, Michelle, I think, shares this feeling. We're very proud that we came out of this crazy process of politics intact. Our friends from before we were famous or before we were president, they're still our best friends. Those are still the folks we roll with. And part of that is because we never drank our own Kool-Aid. We never believed our own hype. We didn't take ourselves seriously. We took the work seriously.
But now, you don't ever want to go back and be like, damn, I kind of did my thing on that speech. Or
the only thing that happens is sometimes when I'm in interviews, they'll play old clips, and I'll be like, man, I look young.
That's it? The age is the only thing?
Yeah. I start looking and I say, you know what? That hair really did get really a lot grayer than it was. Kind of sneaks up on you. Just a warning for later.
Thank you for the heads up. I appreciate it. I guess we can end on this. There's a powerful quote in the book, and maybe the most powerful to me, because not only is it introspective, but it's honest. And you said, whatever projects I'd hoped but failed to accomplish, the country was in a better shape now than when I'd started. Do you think that now that this is the end of his presidency, President Trump can say the same?
No. I mean, look, some of this has to do with the pandemic. He will be the first president since Herbert Hoover to have lost jobs during the course of his presidency. Some of this has to do with policies he's made to encourage pollution instead of trying to clean up pollution, to weaken legal protections and civil rights rather than strengthen them. So no, I don't think the country's stronger, and it's certainly more polarized even than it was when I left office. But the point of that sentence was to say that the presidency, like any other career, any other stage of life, you run your race, and you don't completely control. When you get the baton where you're at in the race, you hand it off, and you don't completely control what happens after you've handed off the baton. All you control is that part of the race that you ran.
Sure.
And what I could say is that as much as was left undone, when I left office, there was still poverty, there was still racism, there was still climate change wasn't solved, but we had made things better, and we had put us on track to move in a better direction, and that I'm proud of.
Last question. In your opinion, what has President Trump done well?
I actually think that some of the work he's done around getting hostages rescued, he seems to have taken an interest in that, and that's always a good thing. I think that although his rhetoric was inconsistent and overcranked and not ultimately that effective, it's important for us to challenge China on some of its trade practices that historically have hurt U.S. manufacturing. Beyond that, I'd have to put it a little. I'd have to give it a little more thought.
Yeah, it seemed a bit tough for you to answer that.
Yeah,
Fair
but
enough.
you know what? The good news is that we have a chance with a new president, new vice president, to make more progress, and that's thanks to the fact that you and your dad and others you said who hadn't voted previously were on tap to, make their voices heard. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Mr. President. We can only hope for a promised land to be here sooner than later. And I thank you for taking the time.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, man. All good?
All good.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed
Appreciate
it.
it. Thank you.
That was an excellent interview, man.
We were supposed to still be rolling on that, man. That's the stuff I need.